guys, today I'm going to be reviewing Glass Sword and Cruel Crown, both by Victoria Aveyard. So I didn't own Cruel Crown when I read Glass Sword, so I think that it would have been better to read Red Queen, Cruel Crown, Glass Sword, but I read it Glass Sword and then Cruel Crown. So we're going to go ahead and talk about Cruel Crown first. So the first story was Queen's Song. I found it extremely interesting to read from her perspective just because she grew up in the silver world and we haven't really seen a first-hand account of that. We've seen Cal's reactions to how Mare thinks of the silvers, but we haven't necessarily seen like a POV from someone who grew up in that world. So I thought it was really interesting to read from her perspective, even though she didn't even really like the ways that silver ran their side of the world. So I thought that was really, really interesting. So the first story was definitely shorter than the second story, but I can see where the second story was more important to the books as they're continuing now, considering the Queen isn't in the stories anymore, but the characters from the second story are. So the second story was Steel Stars, and this followed Farley. I absolutely loved seeing how Shade and Farley met and how him and some of the other misfits got involved in the rebellion. I loved how he tried to show her powers, but he didn't want to show her his powers yet. And so he was just like, oh, you just hit your head on a pipe on the way down, and that's how we got there really fast. And it just made me love Shade's character even more than I already do. I gave both Queen's Song and Steel Scars a 4 out of 5 stars just because I felt like they dragged at some bits, but they just kept my interest like just enough to keep reading. But I don't think that either one of them is absolutely required. If you want to read the series, you can just read Red Queen and Glass Sword and then the next book that comes out next year and you'll be completely fine. But if you do want to expand your knowledge of some of the characters, this would be a great book to read. So Glass Sword, I loved eminently more than Red Queen. I gave Glass Sword like a 4.30 out of 5 stars. The characters just had a deeper depth to them, and I could understand why they made the decisions they did. I liked how more characters were introduced, and we got to see their point of view from being welcomed into this rebellion, from how Mare has already started it. At one point in the book, someone said Burning Crown, and just side note, I feel like that would be a great name for the third book. It's probably not going to be, and I'm pretty sure it's already the name of a book, but Burning Crown would be a great name for the third book in this series. I was much more involved in the characters' lives and I cared more about what happened to them in this book compared to the first one, whereas the first one I kind of just felt like I was watching a movie that I didn't really care about, whereas this one was completely different and I cared what happened to the characters and it just meant a lot more to me what they were going through. I loved the introductions of new powers, and I thought that it was a very interesting way to show, which I still think, my theory, is that the New Bloods can only have powers that the Silver Bloods can't. So the Silver Bloods can't have the New Blood powers. I'm still hanging on to that theory there. One of the main things that I loved about the book, even though it was for a very short period of time, is that it started off right where the first book ended. And so even though I know a lot of people had to wait after they read the first book, I read them like one right after the other in the same minute span. So I really loved picking up because it just felt like one giant book and one giant continuation, and it was just beautiful. Like, have you ever done that before? You know, where like the second book starts off right where the first one ended and it's gorgeous. I know that the common tropes have been a large issue in this series with many readers. Although I've been able to ignore most of them, one of the ones that I can't really deal with is the fact that Keylorn ended up liking Mare. Like, I don't know why they can't ever just have friends. Like, a boy and a girl that have grown up since childhood, and they're just really good friends, and one of them doesn't like the other one. Why has that never happened before? I mean, I'm sure it has, I just haven't read a book where it has, and it's just really irritating to me, because then Mare has to be like, oh, I don't like you in that way, and Keylorn's like, oh, it's fine, whatever, and they get super detached. Like, no, bro TP, man, that's all I'm asking for. It's just like a real, true bro TP from childhood. Just give me that and we'll be okay. The second thing I had an issue with was the repetitive sayings. Like, I felt like they were just saying the same thing again and again, just in different words, and then sometimes even in the same word, and it just got really irritating because it felt like I had read it millions of times, which I kind of had. I understand why they would say it a couple of times, because when you think of a really good word or saying, you're just like, man, I want to keep saying that again and again, but then eventually the feeling wears off, and the feeling wore off for me a lot in this book because I don't need to hear that she's the lightning girl 50 times and that she is annoyed when she's called the little lightning girl. Like, I get it. I get it, Mare. The ending scene? Not necessarily the very end, but you know the fight scene when they all went to the prison? and then people had to die. Why did those people have to die? Authors just, they figure out everybody's favorite character, and they're like, you know what? We're gonna put a stake in their heart. Literally. It literally went through his heart. I'm still really bitter about the fact that Shade died because he just seemed like one of the most natural characters to me, like one of the most characters that I could picture in real life, you know? It wasn't just a book character that I was reading about. You know when some book characters, they're very two-dimensional and they're just on a page? He was like freaking 7-dimensional. I felt like there was just so many different layers that we could have discovered about him and just his personality and his history. 7 different shades of shade. That wasn't funny, and I feel bad making jokes about him because he's dead. The main trope that I'm absolutely 100% okay with, because it just fuels my little bookish heart, is when the main protagonist is like given an ultimatum, and the bad guy goes, oh no, well if you come with me, then I'll save everybody else. And everybody knows it's a lie. Like the readers know it's a lie, the rest of the crew knows it's a lie, and then the protagonist is just blinded because they think that they're doing everything they can to help. And so they just go with the antagonist, and then we don't know what happened because it just stopped right there. But that's one trope that I'm completely okay with, just because I love reading the reactions and everyone's shock and everyone's flippin' outness. Whew. I did like the ending, like, emotional, tense scenes between Cal and Mare when he was like, Mare, that's not who you are. Like, you were being such a different person in the prison, and you were absolutely ruthless, and Cal just, like, absolutely calls her out on all of her crap. And she's like, oh, well, I've been through a lot. And Cal's like, yeah, well, we've all been through a lot. Have you not been seeing what's happening to everybody else? And I just really loved that emotional, tense situation between them two, because I don't like them together. I'm just gonna call it out right now. I don't like them together, and I really hope she doesn't end up with him. I like them as friends. I feel like I like everyone right now that Mare is with as friends at the moment. I don't really like her with anybody romantically yet. Maybe there'll be someone we meet. I said this in the first review, and I'm just gonna say it again. I really hope she doesn't end up with anyone that we've already met in the series. So in the end, following that trope, Mare goes off with Maven, and I am incredibly excited to see where it goes from there. I hope that the next book kind of follows this trend of starting exactly where it stopped. So maybe we'll even continue in the field, like that close to where we stopped off. So to conclude this very all-over-the-place review, and throwing this book around this whole time, I am very excited for the next book in the series. I'm 100% sure that I'm going to love the next book more than this one, just because they keep getting better as they go along, which is honestly the best kind of series, is when you go on Goodreads and you can see that the stars keep going up on each book. That's when you know it's a good series. I hope you all enjoyed the video today, and I will have a new video up next week. Thank you for watching.